All right, so now that the recording is ready, let me just do the mute all. And now I'm ready to go. First of all, I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving celebration last week, whether you were with family or whether you were with friends or both, or even if you were celebrating the holiday just by yourselves in your own home. I trust it was a beautiful holiday and that you enjoyed the camaraderie that comes with the holiday of Thanksgiving, as well as the beauty of the day itself. By the way, Thanksgiving is as close to a Jewish holiday as I find in the general calendar. It's not unusual that I call it a Jewish holiday because the Pilgrims, when they instituted the first Thanksgiving in the year 1621, viewed it as an opportunity to thank God, as did the ancient Israelites, for the blessing of the land by having a celebration in honor of their first year in the new land. So it's not unusual that the holiday of Thanksgiving would relate to us as Jews. But the truth is that of all the holidays, Thanksgiving is the one I know that is most concerned with just one important aspect of life that is also common to Judaism. And that is the aspect of giving thanks, of recognizing and being grateful for the blessings that God has given us. So I can't think of a more appropriate holiday for the Jewish people than Thanksgiving. And I trust that you all had a wonderful time marking the day and celebrating the week. Al, go ahead.
Just a couple of historical points. When the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, or Plymouth Rock landed on them, they carried the Old Testament, and they talked about the Hebrew Bible. They were thankful because they got safely to America, the North America continent, and worshiped the Old Testament. And their exodus from England paralleled the exodus from Egypt, in a sense, according to some of the writings. And George Washington wanted to institute the first Thanksgiving nationally, but got pushback. It really wasn't a holiday until a woman whose name I forget, from the East New York, asked 3 presidents in a row before Lincoln to declare Thanksgiving as a national holiday. They all refused. And finally, Abraham Lincoln was the one who said, it's a great idea, let's do it. And I forget the woman's name, but it's a nice piece of history.
It is a nice piece of history. And by the way, it's interesting that 2 of our greatest presidents, Washington initially with the first celebration, although it wasn't made a regular celebration, and Lincoln, the 16th president, were both involved in the establishment of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was really a recognition of the fact that even though America isn't always unified in terms of direction or even necessarily in terms of political philosophy, we give thanks for the diversity that we have, and that diversity is a source of creativity for America. So thanks to both presidents, and thanks to the institution of the holiday, which we have celebrated and which we will hopefully continue to celebrate. All right, I see that we're all on the screen, so I'd like to just pick up from where we left off last week. We have spent the last 6 weeks, today is the 6th week, talking about the first 10, 11, 12, if you read ahead, chapters of the book of Numbers. So that's an average of about, 1 to 2 chapters per week. And that's going to be our rate as we continue this course through next quarter and the quarter after that. Hopefully you've seen something very interesting. You've seen that after the period of the year spent in the wilderness by Mount Sinai, which we haven't studied yet, that's the book of Leviticus. After a year's time when they merely learned about God's law and they became a people in the midst of Sinai and learned of God's blessings directly, after that year and 1 month, God told the people essentially, the time has come, you are ready to continue your travels. We will complete the march that you have started. I will bring you to the borders of the land of your ancestors, the land of Canaan. And there I will watch over you as you go on to enter the next stage of your existence as a people, as a nation. You will go in, you will do contest for, you will conquer the land from its inhabitants. And after you are victorious, after you are successful, you will apportion the land among the tribes. And at that point, after the land has been divided, you will live comfortably and thankfully in the midst of the land which I have given you. And you will see that I am God who is faithful to fulfill the promises that I made to your ancestors. And I told you last week that had it not been for an incident that occurs, as we will talk about today, the Jewish people were almost there. They were almost home. They were about a little over a year out of the land of Egypt. They had developed their institutions. They had established a way of life. God had demonstrated his protecting care over Israel, both providing the physical necessities that they needed, the blessings of food and water and care, and also protecting them from outside forces and outside enemies that threatened them. So it looked as if everything was set. And God, as we saw last week, gives the Israelites their final marching instructions. All right, we've organized, we've studied the Torah, we've talked about how to organize the camp, how you will dwell, how you will settle. We've taken a census. We know how many of you there are, at least men of a certain age. You are now ready to go, and this is the order in which you are to march to the land. And then, as we saw, at the end of chapter 10, there was that strange, what we called last week, the book between the books, which is to say, those two verses at the end of chapter 10, which we explained could be seen as it were as the beginning and end of what would have been the fifth book. The Jewish people is ready. It marches out from Mount Sinai. It, together with the Torah, marches toward the land of Canaan. The people say, Kuma Adonai, rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let those who hate you flee before you. That would have been the beginning of the book. And then God would have taken them to the very borders of Israel. That's how this book Numbers should have ended. And then the last book, which is really not the last book of Deuteronomy, would have been the story of the conquest of the land. And after the successful conquest, when each of the tribes had received their territorial portion, then Israel would have said, Shuva Adonai, return, O Lord, amidst the hundreds of thousands of families of Israel. In other words, it would have been the beginning and end of the settlement of the land of Israel. But I told you that it didn't go quite the way we expected, and perhaps not even the way the people expected. God, I can't say, he probably knew what was going to happen, but the decision was not God's. Just to return to something we discussed last week, it was not God who caused the people to sin. It was not God who caused the people to falter and to turn away from what would have been an imminent entry into the land of Israel. It was the free-willed choice of the people themselves to turn away from God, to turn away from the blessings that had already been given, out of fear and anxiety, to turn away from the blessing that they were being offered. Now, I suggested to you, and this I'm going to stop our introduction, that you might want to look at chapters 11 and 12. And how many of you had the opportunity to look at chapters 11 or 12? All right, some of you. All right. So rather than my describing 11 and 12 for you, I'm just going to ask you, does anybody want to comment on what you read in chapter 11 and 12? First of all, what did the Jewish people do that got so angry? And as you see in the text, God gets angry, okay? Unlike the first test, when the people left Egypt and they complained about water and food, God was very patient with them. Moses may have been a little frustrated, but God doesn't complain, doesn't chastise the people. He understands that the people is newly freed from slavery. He doesn't expect too much of them, and he gives them time. Whenever the people complain, what are we going to drink for? Well, even before that, how are we going to escape the Egyptians who are pursuing us? God causes a wind to blow. They cross through the Red Sea. The wind ends and their enemies are destroyed. The people say, we're thirsty, God. They say, we're thirsty. We don't have anything to drink. We've run out of water. God provides them water on several occasions. The people say, a couple of weeks after they leave Egypt, the provisions that we took out of the land of Egypt, the food that we brought with us, the matzah and whatnot, we've used it all up. What are we supposed to eat? God doesn't complain about them. God doesn't say that God is angry. Moses turns to God. God says, people are concerned about what to eat. Fine. Tell them starting now in the morning, they're going to get up, and every morning, except for Saturday, they're going to go and they're going to find manna from heaven, bread from heaven that's going to satisfy their hunger. And furthermore, he says, just to supplement this diet of manna, they're also going to get quail. They're also going to get meat to eat too. I don't want them to have to resort to a desert diet. I'm going to give them the benefits that they enjoyed in Egypt. They will get food to eat. I will march before them in a pillar of cloud. I will protect them in night by my pillar of fire that will guard them. I will provide for their physical needs. I will provide for their protection. I will even guarantee that they successfully reach Mount Sinai. And there at Mount Sinai, of course, when God reveals himself to the people and the people gratefully acknowledge God and accept him and accept his covenant, his Torah, and say, we will follow God, we will do what he tells us to do. At that point, God begins to teach them the Torah. And for a year, they both learn Torah, but also build the institutions, the tabernacle and whatnot, that will mark the life of the Jewish people. God will dwell in their midst. When they are finally, a year later, required to leave Mount Sinai, no problem. They don't have to take Mount Sinai with them. They're taking God with them in the tabernacle. It's like they're getting a to-go order. They don't even have to order a doggy bag. God says, "This is I've taught you. You've learned here at my site. You've learned what I want of you. Now, even though you're leaving the site, my presence will be with you, and you will continue to know what to do, and I will continue to dwell in your midst and guarantee your success." So then the people moved, as we saw last week. Okay. And we'll go back to that in just a little bit. And then comes chapter 11 and 12. Would anybody like to characterize either one of the chapters for me? What were those chapters about? Anybody want to, in a brief paragraph or two, or maybe a few sentences, describe to me what happens after from the beginning of chapter 11?
Yeah,
okay, Mike, go ahead. I see your hand.
yeah, okay. So they complain that they're no longer getting any fish and fowl and the fresh vegetables and all the stuff they used to when they were living in Egypt. And so God says, okay, we'll bring, I guess, 70 of your leaders, and he basically brings food for them, and they all get sick and die.
Okay,
That's
all right.
really what happens, right?
So people complain. God gets irritated. Interestingly enough, in contrast to what we've seen in part 1 of the Exodus, the story from Egypt to Mount Sinai, God is patient and long forbearing with the people. But it seems like God is getting mad even before Moses gets mad. It's like Moses has to restrain God. And by the way, Mike, you're sort of right. The people begin complaining, but take a look at the first complaint. Take a look, everybody, at chapter 11,
Okay.
1. And I'm going to, chapter 11, verse 1. In the book of Numbers, and it starts right away. The people took to seeking complaints. They began complaining, and it was evil in the ears of the Lord, and the Lord heard, and his wrath flared, and a fire of the Lord burnt against them. All right. So what are they complaining about? Did anybody figure out what they were complaining about in that first section? Did anybody know? Right afterwards, fills it out for you. But it doesn't even tell you what they complained about, does it? Okay. All it says is the people took to seeking complaints. In other words, the people started complaining, and it was bad in the sight of God. God did not like that. God had provided everything for them. They had been given all of these wonderful blessings. And what is their reaction to the news that now God is going to give them the land? They began complaining. Now, maybe they were complaining because they liked it there and it was easy for them and they liked it being in the camp, and Sinai was kind of a home for them, and that's where God appeared to them. For whatever reason, the moment they start walking, they start complaining. And it doesn't have to do initially with food, okay? All we know is they complain, and the complaints bother God. It disturbs God. And he is angry. It says that his wrath flared and the fire of the Lord burnt against them. Now, we don't know what that really means. Does it mean that he physically set up a conflagration of fire in the midst? There are some rabbis who say literally God expressed his anger by burning up part of the camp. And if you look at the text, you can see that interpretation. But it needn't mean that. All it means is that now that they were about to enter the land and God was about to fulfill his promise, the people's reaction wasn't one of gratitude, it was one of complaint, okay? And God's response to it was he was angry. The fire of the Lord might simply be a way of saying God was angry. Okay. The people were complaining. They were set to begin the last part of their journey. And rather than being grateful for being able to take this next step in their journey and going to the land, the people complain against God. God is angry. And it says that God's anger burnt against them and it consumed against the edge of the camp. Now, what does that mean? It consumed. It sounds like, well, if you want to be literal, God set a fire against them and it burnt the edge of the camp. And that's the way God expressed his anger at the people. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord and the fire died down. And he named that place Taberah, which means fire, because God had fired, he had burnt, he had consumed the people there. Right. So did they literally suffer some kind of physical punishment for complaining? Or was it somehow that they angered God there and something happened that indicated that God wasn't happy? We don't know. But the episode goes on. The complaints don't end with just the complaints. Whatever the complaint was, we got to move, we got to go. And this is, what's hard. We don't know what to do. We don't feel ready yet, whatever it was. Then we read verse 4. The rabble that was among them cultivated a craving, and the children of Israel also wept once more, and they said, who will feed us meat? Okay, now, who started the complaint? Where did this complaint come from? Did it start with the Jewish people? What do you think? Did it start with the Jewish people? Okay, you might have been. It said the rabble. Who was the rabble? The rabble that was among them cultivated a craving. Now, the rabbis will try and come up with several explanations. They will say that along with the Israelites, when they left Egypt, there was a mixed multitude of peoples that were not necessarily Hebrews themselves, but joined themselves onto the Jewish people, and that this complaint against the God, at least initially, was not instigated by the Jewish people themselves, God forbid. It was instigated by these hangers-on, this mixed multitude who began to complain. It wasn't, God forbid, the Jews who started to complain in the beginning. It was these other people who attached themselves to the Israelites who began to complain. And naturally, when you get one group complaining, it sets off complaints all over the camp. So that's why it says, the rabble that was among them cultivated a craving, and the children of Israel also wept once more. So first the complaints start from whatever quarter, and then the complaints get going, and the people of Israel are unhappy. And what are they unhappy about? Did God not protect them? God protected them. Did God not teach them Torah? No, God taught them Torah. Did not God feed them? No, he continued to feed them. Did not he order the camp? No, he ordered the camp. What were they angry about? What were they upset about? And they said, who will feed us meat? We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now our life is parched. There is nothing, we have nothing to anticipate but this manna. Okay. What are the Jewish people complaining of? Not that they're hungry. They had the manna. They were complaining about the diversity of their diet. They did not have the rich diet that they remembered or fantasized from the land of Egypt. Yeah, we were slaves, and yeah, we had a tough time, and yeah, we were exploited, and we cried out to God to save us. But we don't remember any of that. We don't remember that we asked God to save us and he brought us out. We remember that we ate every day and that we had food to eat and we had meat and we had vegetables. Here in the desert, we don't have these vegetables. We're on a pretty fixed diet here. So they're complaining not because they're necessarily hungry, but because their diet doesn't meet their variety. It's like going to camp, if you've ever gone to a camp, and you complain about the people who the camp who cook the food. Most of the complaints about camp have to do with the cooks. The food at camp is never very good. It's always subpar. You find something to complain about. People like to go to camp. They like the atmosphere. They like the activities. They like the religious vibes they get. So you got to complain about something. So everybody complains about the food. Well, the people were complaining about the food. They essentially said, Moses, how long are we going to eat this plain diet we had? Okay, it was enough for us. We've been here for a year. Give us some variety. Give us something more substantial. And notice that God here is really the one who's to blame. Even though they say, Moses and Aaron, the leaders, you haven't given us anything, they're really complaining about God. What they're really saying is we are in a desert. There's no water. There's no fish, obviously, for us. We can't eat our fish. We can't eat vegetables. We're not cultivating the land. We're nomads. We may be able to eat some of our sheep and some of our livestock that we can eat, and obviously they were eating that because they had already begun the system of bringing the offerings to the tabernacle. So they were eating meat, they were eating manna, the bread from heaven every day, but they weren't satisfied. And they said to Moses, they said, who will feed us meat? And the implication is not Moses, we expect you to do, but Moses, where's God? Why isn't God providing us with the food we eat? Now, we got a brief description of what manna was like. This is how I know what manna was like. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that. It says that the manna was like coriander seed. Its color was like the color of the dolach, which we don't really understand, but it was a white wafery kind of substance. The people would stroll and gather it, grind it in a mill or pound it in a mortar and cook it in a pot or make it into cakes. In other words, there are lots of ways you could prepare the manna. It could be eaten raw, it could be eaten cooked, it could be eaten baked. There were lots of ways to enjoy it. And it tasted like the taste of dough kneaded with oil. I think that's supposed to be a compliment. It's supposed to taste tasty. When the dew descended upon the camp at night, the manna would descend upon it. So each night, when the dew fell upon the camp, the people would awake in the morning, except on Saturday, and they would find that the manna was all there for them. And all they had to do was go out and gather it, each person for his family. And the only restriction was that whatever manna they gathered, they had to eat that manna throughout the day. They could not leave any of it over because it wouldn't keep, except on Friday when they gathered a double portion and it lasted them for 2 days. Now, what was Moses's reaction to the people's grumbling, whether it was the first grumbling or the grumbling about food? Listen to this. Moses heard the people weeping in their family groups. Notice it says weeping. They weren't just complaining, they were really upset. They were weeping. My parents would have said, you cry? I'll give you something to cry for. But these people were really weeping, okay? And it said, Moses heard them, each of the family groups, each one at the entrance of his tent, and the wrath, the ire of the Lord of Hashem flared greatly, and in the eyes of Moses, it was bad. Moses didn't think it was a good thing that people were talking about what God wasn't giving them food. It was bad in Moses' eyes, but God was angry. Now, if I'm the benefactor, if I'm the person who's supporting everybody and I give them everything and I take care of them, and they turn around and they kick it up in my face and say, we don't want what you're giving us anymore. This isn't good enough. We want something more. We remember when we were slaves, even when we were slaves and we didn't have freedom, we got decent food. You're not providing us with what we need. You're sending us out. They forget everything of their life in Egypt. They forget from a year before. All they can think of now is what they lack. God was angry. Moses was not happy. Moses said to the Lord, now what is Moses' reaction? Normally Moses turns to God and says, the people are thirsty. What shall I do for them? The people are hungry. They have asked for food. They run out of supplies. What shall we give them? It's a kind of the people bring out a complaint. The complaint has some basis in fact. Moses sets the complaint before God. He explains what the people are anxious about, and God reverently recognizes the people have a reason to complain, and God provides the answer. But look what happens here. Moses said to the Lord, why have you done evil to your servant? Who is Moses talking about? Go ahead, Joseph.
He's talking about himself, I believe, when I read that. It's for the first time encountering Moses, he's had enough of these people.
He's overwhelmed.
He's burdened, he's overwhelmed. He can't stand there bickering after everything that God and Moses himself have done for him. And he just wants to, at this point, doesn't even want to lead them anymore. It almost looked at me when I read it, like he's done with leading this group.
Right. It sounds like Moses is upset by the ingratitude of the people. And notice, Moses hasn't had a terrible year. He's been teaching the people Torah. It's been a good year. The people have, all the time they've been at Sinai, the people haven't complained. We've heard of no rebellions. Everything is going good. What Moses might have thought is good. We spent a year together. God gave the people his Torah. The people accepted the God. They repented. They're making the golden calf and worshiping it. Now we're off. it must have been Moses's frustration when he realized no sooner did they start the journey than the people he thought he had left behind a year ago, there they were again. Moses was frustrated and personally a little insulted because he said, I don't understand, God. I did what you told me. I went to Pharaoh. I brought the people out of Egypt. I took the journey. We followed your cloud. The people had some complaints. You addressed and responded to their complaints. I brought them to Mount Sinai like you told me. They appeared below the mountain. You revealed your Torah to them. The people wholeheartedly accepted you and agreed to keep your Torah. I went up to the mountain to bring them down the information. And what happened the moment I was away from them, they begin to complain and they begin to feel like they've been rejected. And they turn away from your Torah, God, and they make these other representations because they're afraid that there's no one with them. But God, even though you were angry with the people, even though you wanted to destroy them and make my children, my family, your new people, I said to God, God, don't do it. I'm their leader. Remember the people. Remember the promise you made to them. Remember what the world will say. Do not be angry at this people. Remember their background. Have patience with them. And God says, fine, Moses, for your sake, I'm going to accept that. I'm going to have patience with them. And God originally says, but I'm not going with them because they're fickle. They're going to get me angry. And Moses says, not good enough, God. If you don't go with us, if you force me to take on the burden of this people alone and you won't even accompany us and they will know that you're not in our presence, I'm not going to make the journey. So God finally says, all right, Moses, not only do I agree to be with you, not only won't I reject the people, but more importantly, I will agree to lead them and I will not desert them and I will be with them. So Moses thinks it's all okay. He spent a year preparing them and now Moses is moving again. And the first thing he hears is just as the people begin to complain about God. Gail, you were going to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, when I read it this time, I thought of something else. And that is that were the people just fetching like Jews always do? Or was it a symptom of something else? Their fear. That
Couldn't have been like Jews always do.
Well, yes, we always fetch. But
well, that we know that now, thousands of years later, but at that time we hadn't established a reputation for being fetchers yet, for being complainers.
But you know, the unknown is always much scarier than the known is. And I think that it was just their way of saying, you know, really that they're so frightened. Even with God leading them, they're frightened of this new life, which is why they had to wander and not go in the land.
I would thoroughly agree with you. I think they are complaining not because of any real adversity, Gail, or because of any real lack that they suffered, because God had provided for them. They were afraid for what they didn't know. And remember, when we started the book of Numbers, I told you it's a book that starts out with potential, but it's in the end, a very cynical book because the potential, the hope that was there in the beginning, we lose it. And the people, even though they were now a year out of slavery and they had seen what God had done, very quickly, once they start the trip to the land, once they're about to fulfill the blessing that God had promised them to go and inherit the land, the fear, the anxiety, the realization that now they're responsible for their own fate, whatever it was, that fear of the unknown, that anxiety of having to be responsible for their fate proves to be too much for them. Okay? They prove not to be able to fulfill the oath they made to God, or everything you tell us we will do and we will obey. Okay, so I'm not condemning the people, Gail. I think it's a very human emotion, but God is angry about it. Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, when I read it, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that Moses is complaining to God and saying, I failed, kill me. I can't take this anymore. I'm the fail. He makes it seem like he's the failure.
Moses, you're right, Leslie, he's the leader. And he's saying to God, if the people don't want to go, if the people don't trust you, if after a year of teaching the Torah to the people,
then he did something wrong.
I must have done something wrong, God. It couldn't be you. You protected them. You watched over them. You gave them good teaching. If the people still don't trust in you, it must have been me as the leader who did something wrong. But how could I not do something wrong? Did I give birth to this entire people? This people is numerous. There's many of them. How could you expect God, one man like me, to keep this people in line? And Moses interprets, you're right, Leslie, he interprets the failure not as God's failure. He doesn't even ascribe the failure to the people. He just assumes the people are weak. He says, God, why did you burden me with this responsibility? Now I'm the one in charge. I'm the one who's supposed to bring these people into the land. And what did I do to deserve this? Moses is also a complaining guy. Moses, who is not want to complain, is complaining. Why have you done this evil to your servant? He's saying to God, what did I do that you did this terrible thing to me? Have I not found favor in your eyes? Haven't I done what you asked for? Haven't I been a faithful servant to you? What, haven't I found favor in your eyes that you place the burden of this entire people upon me? Why did I get this responsibility? Why did you lay the burden of this entire nation upon me? It's almost as if Moses is saying, if I failed, God, it's because you've set me an impossible task. It's because you set me to be a leader over this entire nation. And there's no way that I or any one human being is capable of leading this people and into the victory that you have promised them. Okay. Did I conceive the entire people, or have I given to birth with it? I'm not their father. I'm not their mother. I didn't give birth to this people. This people is your people, God. You told me, go into the land of Egypt and bring my people, God said, meaning the Jewish people. Did I give birth to this people? Did I conceive of them? Am I the one who's responsible for all of them? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a suckling. You're treating me like I'm the nurse here. I'm the au pair. You've got this people, they're your people, but you've given me the responsibility to taking care of them. And now that the people are acting up, you're expecting me, Moses, to handle the people. They're not my people, they're your people. What are you doing to me? You as a nurse, okay, where shall I get meat to give to this entire people when they weep, saying, give us meat that we may eat? How am I going to keep these people happy, God? Moses doesn't even presume to turn to God to say, God, could you help me out here? You tell me, you say to give the people meat, provide for the people. What am I going to provide for them? I'm not you. I can't provide for them. And yet you tell me to care for this people's physical need, okay? I cannot carry this nation, for it is too heavy for me, okay? If the people are complaining about physical comfort, Moses is complaining about leadership responsibility. God, you told me to be the leader of this people. You told me to be the shepherd of this flock, of your flock, and I can't do it. It's not possible. I cannot provide for them. And if this is how you deal with me, then kill me now. If this is the way what you're expecting me, just kill me, okay? I give up. I don't want to be leader anymore. If I'm going to have to bear with all this for all the rest of not only the wandering, but from whatever's going to happen afterward, if I'm going to have to provide for their every need, then God, tell you what, do me a favor, kill me. Remember, Moses didn't ask for God to spare him before. He said, if you're going to kill the people, kill me. But now we're saying, if you're going to give me this people to watch over, if I'm the nurse for them, just kill me. Kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see my evil. So he's saying to them, it's better for me to die here than it is for me to bear what you are now imposing upon me. So yes, it is not just the failure of the people, whether it's the few complainers or whether it's now more and more people, it's everybody's failure. Even Moses doesn't see how he's going to be able to provide for the people. The Lord now says to Moses, all right, so now this is the pregnant moment. The Lord said to Moses, gather to me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders to the people and its officers. Take them to the tent of meeting and have them stand there with you. All right, Moses, you complain. What have I done? Why do I have to bear them alone? This is what I'm telling you. Take 70 men from the tribes of Israel. By the way, how many tribes are there? 12. So Moses was being asked really to take 6 men of each tribe. 6 times 12 was what? 72, right? Okay. So God is basically saying, take members of the household of Israel, take leaders among the people, 6 from each tribe. We're going to have to figure out where those other 2 go to. Take 6 from each tribe, okay? And let them go to the tabernacle and let them stand there with you. And then God says, I will descend and speak with you there, and I will increase some of the spirit that is upon you, and I will place it upon them, and they will bear the burden of this people with you, and you shall not bear it alone. God responds first to Moses. He says, you say to me, what am I going to do, God, with this people? I cannot bear it alone. Moses, you don't have to bear it alone. Okay. There's no you expressed your concern to me. I'm telling you, appoint these people. Now, these people are different than the judges. Remember, Moses has appointed people before, but the people he's appointed before were judges. The people he's appointing now are not judges. What are they? What are these people from each of the tribes supposed to be? What are they supposed to share with Moses? Ever think about that?
They're the elders. They're the, right?
Okay. What are they supposed to share with Moses then? Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, what God is telling, they're supposed to repeat what Moses is, the same thing that God told Moses. They're all supposed to say the same thing.
Say the same thing, but more than just say the same thing, what God is saying is, this job is bigger than any one man, Moses. And one of the first things that Moses learns as a leader, he learned it already with the judges, is delegation. If you're going to lead a community, the first thing you better figure out is how to delegate authority, okay? God says to Moses, Moses, just as you appointed judges so that people didn't have to sit and wait for you to hear each and every one of their complaints and causes, now I'm telling you, you tell me the responsibility of leading these people after 13 months is too much. I'm agreeing with you. Here's what I'm telling you. You don't have to do it alone. I am telling you to take people from each of the tribes and they will share leadership with you. Go ahead, Leslie, and then Barbara. Leslie.
You know, I mean, he's telling all of them to say the same thing to them. How terrible they are.
No, I don't know that he's saying, I don't think the God is.
Well, I mean, she'll eat it not one day, not 2 days, but basically.
Oh, yeah, but that's.
And they're all supposed to say the same thing, right?
Yeah, but that's not what God is telling them yet. God hasn't dealt with the people yet. What God is saying is, Moses, the responsibility for leadership does not rest on you.
Okay.
You're the prophet. You are the one I will speak with, but you don't have to main order in the camp yourself. You do not have to be the sole authority. You're not the marshal in town. Not everything is on you. These people, he didn't say, repeat what you said. He said, they will share leadership with you, meaning that the people of Israel will not be led by you alone, Moses. You will be the prophet. You will be the figurative head of the people, but the leaders of the people will be their elders, will be the people in authority who they trust. They will share leadership with you. You will not have to be the sole leader. God is responding directly, Leslie, to what Moses says. Moses said, God, I can't do this alone. I didn't bear this people alone. I can't handle them alone. I need help. And God says, you know what, Moses, you're absolutely right. Take members of the tribes and they'll share leadership with you. You don't have to do it alone anymore. They're going to do it with you. Okay, Barbara, you were going to say something?
I was just going to basically say that I think God was trying to, I think the people had started to lose faith in what Moses was doing, but so that God said, you know, I'll show them that I'm talking to you, and that's why he had them gather. But basically he was saying that he would tell Moses in front of these 70 people, you know, what to do, and that they should follow him and listen to him.
Although nowhere are we told that what God says to the 70 people, he ever tells the Israelites. Moses' complaint, Barbara, is very specific. I cannot do this alone, God, for whatever reason. The people are scared. They're afraid. They don't want responsibility. They don't want to travel. You can't put this all on me. God says, you're right. Take all these people, take these elders, bring them together, and I'm going to charge you all together as one group. You are going to lead the Jewish people. The Jewish people didn't necessarily hear that, Barbara. All they know is that now Moses is not the sole leader anymore. The only thing they know now is that they are being led not by Moses, the servant of God, Moses, the prophet. They're going to be led by their own people. There is going to be a group of people that leads them, okay? Not just one head camp counselor. There's going to be a whole group of people who are responsible for security, okay? So Moses listens to what God said. And God only says that to Moses. What he has said, Barbara, is not for the people's benefit. He has only spoken to Moses. He's only responding to Moses's concern. God, what are you going to do for me? How am I going to lead this people? How are you going to help me? And God says, I'm going to give you help. I'm going to give you people to share the burdens of leadership. And then it goes on, verse 18, God says, and to the people you will say the following, okay? Now that I've assured you that you're not alone, you say the following to the people. Prepare yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who will feed us meat? It was better for us in Egypt. So God says, all right, now I'm telling you, turn back to the people who are complaining and say to them, you've complained. You said we don't have variety in our diet. There's nothing, you have to give us something more. God says to Moses, turn to the people and tell them what they've asked for, they're going to get, okay? Even though God is angry that the people haven't learned to trust him yet, he says to Moses, go to the people and tell them that by this time tomorrow night, they're going to have everything they want, okay? Okay, who you said, who will feed us meat? By this time tomorrow, you shall eat meat. Say to them, how the Lord will give you meat and you will eat. Not for 1 day shall you eat, not for 2 days, not for 5 days, not for 10 days, not for 20 days. God says, it's not like the first time when I give you some meat to eat for a little while. I'm going to provide you with a steady stream of meat to eat. You're going to eat so much meat, you are literally going to get sick of it, okay? Okay, I'm going to give you so much meat, you're going to become sick of meat. You're going to be tired of what you request. Not for 1 day, or a couple of days, or 5 days, or 10, or even 20, for an entire month of days, you shall continue to eat this meat until it comes out your nose. Now, I don't know about you, but when it says comes out your nose, it means you're going to get tired of this variety. You're upset with the simple meal, the food that sustains you. All right, you want variety? I'll give you variety till it comes out your nose, okay? And becomes nauseating to you. You're going to have such variety. You're going to see it's not the physical food that's the problem. I'm going to give you variety, all you can handle until it's nauseating to you. Because you have rejected the Lord who is in your midst. Because your sin is not your lack of variety of food or your wanting things. Your sin is that I, God, who have been taking care of you, you have rejected me. You've complained to me. You have not been satisfied with the gifts I have given you. I who have been in your midst, and you have wept before him, meaning you people have wept before God, saying, why did we leave the land of Egypt? God is saying to them, I'll give you everything you need. I'll give you food in such amounts that you'll get sick of it, because you didn't trust me and you wept to me and you wanted to go back to Egypt. That was a real sin. You who I took out of Egypt, you who I did everything for, you who I made into a people and covenanted with, you respond to me by saying, let's go back to Pharaoh and back to Egypt? That's the way you respond to me? That's why God is angry. And he tells Moses, tell the people to get ready. They're about to eat like they've never eaten before, okay? And then Moses is a little doubtful. Now, Moses, look at what it says. Moses said, 600,000 foot soldiers are the people in whose midst I am. Yet you say, I will give them meat. There are 600,000 warriors alone. You're telling me to tell the people they're going to eat meat till it's nauseating to them. You're going to feed them all, men, women, and children, and that they will feed them for a month of days. Can sheep and cattle be slaughtered for them and suffice for them? Even if we take all of our flocks and all of our herds, which we brought out of Egypt, even if we kill all of them, can we possibly sustain 2.5 million people with food? Even if if all the fish of the sea were gathered for them, would it suffice? In other words, God says you can't do it. And Moses says, God, how are you going to do it? There's not enough animals. They don't possess enough animals. There's not enough animals in the wilderness. There's not enough fish in the sea, even if we were by a sea, for you to be able to feed all these people. The Lord said to Moses, God's got to correct Moses here, right? Hashem said to Moses, is the hand of Hashem limited? Moses, you're saying me I can't do it? You see me closer than anyone. You're telling me you can't do it, Lord? It's impossible? Now you will see whether my word comes to pass or not. Moses himself has proven his lack of faith. He has said to God, how on earth are you going to feed the people? You managed to produce food for them from heaven. You managed to produce some meat for them from quail for a few days, but you're going to feed this entire people for a month's time, the entire people? How are you going to do that, God? And God says, am I limited? Am I restricted? Am I not God? Can I not do whatever I choose to do? Moses left and spoke the words of God to the people, and he gathered 70 men from among the elders of the people, and he had them stand around the tent. So Moses does two things. First of all, he says to the people who complained, don't worry, what you have asked for, God has agreed to give you. You asked for food, for sustenance, for variety. God is going to feed you like you've never been fed before. Okay, you're going to have variety like you've never had before. It's going to be a difference. And Moses has also been told by God, you don't have to worry about doing this alone, Moses, because these leaders are going to do this with you. Okay, so what happens? The Lord descended in a cloud and spoke to him, meaning to Moses, in the midst of the gathered elders. He spoke to him, and he increased some of the spirit that was upon him, upon Moses, and he gave it to the 70 men, the elders. When the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. For a moment, God inspires the leaders. They now know a little bit of what it's like to be Moses, okay? God takes some of the spirit that was upon Moses and he places it upon the 70 others. Now, here's the problem. There were supposed to be an equal number of elders from each tribe. You can't be equal, right? So if there are equal number of elders from each tribe, it means 6 is the minimum. 6 times 12 is what? 72. But you can't have 72 because God said, bring 70 men. So obviously one of the tribes was supposed to not, how do we decide, God, which tribe sends 5, which 2 tribes send 5, and the rest of them send 6? That would be 70 men, right? So God doesn't explain it, but look what happens. 2 men remained behind in the camp. Obviously, these 2 men were 2 men of whatever tribe it was that didn't send it, all right? They would have been included as leaders, but God only said, send me 70 men. They were part of the 72 that would have gone if each tribe had been equally represented. 2 remained behind in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. So 2 men voluntarily said, you know what, we can't be 70. Let the other tribes go send 6 men each. Eldad and Medad, we 2 will stay behind. It'll be 70. God will be pleased, and we'll forgo the honor of being leaders with our other leaders from the other tribes, all right? But what happens? It said, 2 men remained behind in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, the name of the second was Medad, and the Spirit of God rested upon them. They had been among the recorded ones. In other words, they had been among the 72 men who had been selected for leadership, but 2 men had to stay behind. They had been among the recorded ones, but they had not gone out to the tent. They were among the 6 men from each tribe who were selected to share leadership with Moses, but recognizing that there couldn't be 72 men because God only specified 70, they said, we'll stay behind in the camp, Moses. We're not going to demand that we be leaders too. We'll stay behind in the camp. They had been among the recorded ones, but they had not gone out to the tent of meeting. And instead, the spirit of prophecy, which fell upon all the men who stood by the tent of meeting, they started prophesying too. So what happened? Not only the 70 men that were with Moses by the camp, but these 2 men who had been designated to be leaders, they started prophesying. Whatever it was that it meant, speaking in tongues, whatever, God appears to them too, okay? They prophesied in the camp. And then suddenly, the people in the camp who are not necessarily with Moses at the tent of meeting, they see these 2 men begin to prophesy. And we are told a youth ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. According to tradition, this young man was Joshua. Joshua saw that these 2 men were prophesying, and he runs out to Moses and he says, Moses, these 2 men who were designated among the 72, who did not go out because you only assembled 70, the Spirit fell upon them and they're prophesying in the camp. They're being blessed with your Spirit. And then an amazing thing comes. Okay, Joshua, the son of Nun, who was probably the man who went out and told him, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Moses since his youth, spoke up and said, my Lord Moses, stop them. restrict them, incarcerate them. Do not let them prophesy. You said only 70 men who are with you. Do not let these men who are not with you share in the glory of prophecy. And then Moses says to Joshua, this is amazing. Are you being zealous for my sake? Are you worried about my honor? He says to them, would that the entire people of the Lord could be prophets, if Hashem would but place his spirit upon all of them. I'm not worried that 2 extra people besides the 70 are leading. If it had my wish, all the God's people would be prophets. I don't seek this honor from myself, Moses. I'm not seeking aggrandizement. I don't have to be the leader. I don't have to be the head honcho. You want to restrain these 2 men because they're prophesying in the camp. If it were up to me, God would set his spirit upon everybody. I'm not seeking honor for myself or power for myself. Would that God were to set his spirit upon the entire nation. Yes, God is sharing this power with these elders to help me lead, but I'm not being jealous that my power is being restricted. It's not that God is taking away my power. As far as I'm concerned, if God had placed this power, this ability on all the people directly, that would have been fine for me. Moses thus demonstrates that he is the most humble of all human beings. Moses doesn't seek power. He doesn't say to God, I want more power, make me the authority. He says, God, I can't handle the responsibility myself. God says, fine, I'll appoint elders who will share the burden of leadership with you. And when 2 men of the 72 are prophesying in the camp, and Joshua says, stop them, they're not doing what's authorized. Moses says, you're worried about my sake, about my leadership. Would that all God's people were prophets. Okay, and then the wind sets forth, and the prophets, we'll come back to this later. All right, the point here is, how does it end? Moses said to God, I can't bear it alone. God has said, you don't have to bear it alone. You will appoint people from the tribes to share this responsibility with you. Moses gathers 70 elders as he was told to. 2 of the elders who should have been represented, they prophesied in the camp. When the camp sees that they're not supposed to be prophesying, they send out word, and Joshua is ready to say to Moses, stop them, don't let them do this, they're not authorized. Moses is saying, you're jealous for my sake? Would that all God's people were prophets. So we see here that both Moses's question about Moses's need and the people's are being met. The people say, we want food. Moses said, I want help. And everybody gets what they want. I'm not going to go through the rest of the verses with you, but as you will see, everybody gets what they want. The leaders are appointed. They now will share leadership with Moses. The quail come upon the ground, not for a day, not for a few days, but for a whole month of days. And the people should be satisfied. And unfortunately, they go to excess. We are told that the people go crazy. Okay, listen to what it says. The meat was between their teeth, not yet chewed. They were still in the midst of eating all this meat that they had gotten for these 30 days. And the wrath of the Lord flared against the people, and the Lord struck a very mighty blow against the people. A plague broke out among the people. It was like they had eaten a simple diet for all this time. Suddenly, they absorbed this new diet, and people couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the diet. People began dying. And the place where all this happened was given a name. It was called Kivrot Hata'ava. Is the graves of those who lusted. They ate so much meat. They asked for so much. They indulged. They were so concerned about their physical lusts and desires. They lusted for meat. God says, fine, I'll give them meat until they get sick, until some of them die off. And that's exactly what happened. Okay. He named the place Kivrot Hata'eva because they buried the people who had been craving. And from there they pass on. That's the end of chapter 11. All right. So God gives the people but what they want. Does it satisfy them? Well, it satisfies their craving for variety, but it certainly, people die because of it. Moses now has help, but as you're going to see, the complaining doesn't stop here. The problem with complaints is it never ends. You fulfill the people's desires. You even fulfill Moses' desire. You solve the immediate problem, but because the people don't change, the problem doesn't change. Moses begins to realize the problem isn't food. The problem isn't, as we'll see, water. The problem isn't this or that. The problem is the people. The people are the problem. This is not something that's going to be solved by God providing a one-time relief, because the relief is that the people are the problem. This is something we'll study next time. This is not just a functional change. This is an adjustable change. It's not functional in the sense that they lack something, they go to Moses and God provides. It's that the people can't get off of this problem of constantly complaining. And Moses doesn't know how to get the people off of this blind spot. He cannot get them to have trust, to have faith, to believe in God. Nothing he does is going to be able to satisfy them. So you see, the problem is now set up right from the beginning. And as we will see next time, the problems only get worse. And by the way, they not only get worse, they get more serious. As the problems occur, the problems become one after the other more serious. At first, it deals with material things. Remember, I told you material needs are at the very basis. First, it deals with the material things, food, water, things like that. Next, God wants them to go in and to do battle against the enemies and conquer the land. The people are afraid. Now it's their safety they're not sure of. They can't guarantee their safety. Soon, the people are going to balk against anything. They're going to not be able to even follow the religious laws that God has given them. It's too much for them. They fail. What you see is grumbling, discontent has infected the camp. Moses is not going to be able to exterminate it. And actually, neither is God, because the verdict is this people will never be ready to enter the land and to do what they have to do. They're going to live and they're going to die in the desert for the next 39 years, and then their children will go into the land instead. Okay, is everybody okay with that part of it? You see how the story has now changed. Okay, but that's really not what I wanted to tell you about. I wanted to point out just one verse to you. I'm going to teach you a very quick lesson. It's a very quick lesson. So go back to chapter number 10, before it all went wrong. And I'm going to teach you something very quick, which hopefully you learned about from Rabbi Sachs. Chapter 10 of Numbers, it says the following, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Remember, this was just now when Moses was telling the people, go, get going, inherit the land. The Lord spoke to Moses and he said, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets, make them hammered out, and they shall be yours for summoning the assembly and to cause the camps to journey. That's all the verse says. The last thing God says to the people before he tells them, all right, get going, is he says to Moses, I'm going to commission you now to make for yourself 2 silver trumpets. And when you blow these trumpets shall be for the purpose of summoning the congregation, the assembly, and causing the camps to journey. And that was at that time that Moses probably should have said, rise, O Lord. Okay. The people of Israel is referred to as machanot, as a camp or camps, machaneh, a camp. It is also referred to as an edah, a congregation or an assembly. So the big question I have for you this week is, and this is the big lesson for tonight, it's all based on one verse, okay? It's 2, chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. What is the difference between a congregation, an edah, and a machaneh, a camp? Can someone tell me the difference based on your reading of Sachs? Israel is referred to both as a machaneh, a camp, and as an edah. Go ahead, Hal. I see your hand there. Go ahead.
Well, 2 trumpets. One congregation, in my mind, was summoning of the community to unify the community or the congregation. The other one was in the camp, was to summon for conquest, for entry, for going into the land. So there's an internal and an external function of the trumpets, as I read it.
All right. So you would say that the 2 trumpets represent 2 different functions the trumpets fulfill. And yet the text doesn't say what Hal reasonably suggests. The text says the following. The Lord said to Moses, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets, make them hammered out, and they shall be used by you. They shall be yours. You shall use them for the purpose of summoning the assembly and causing the camps to journey. it wasn't that one camp was for one trumpet was for one purpose and one trumpet was for the other. The two trumpets were always to be sounded for the camp and for the congregation. So it's not that they have two separate functions, it's that they have one function, but the function is bifurcated between a camp and a congregation. Go ahead, Jerry.
It seems that the camp can designate a place, and so when they would change their camp, they're changing the place. But the congregation would be the constant.
All right, so the congregation is the overall, the constant, but the place, the situation of the different groups of Israelites was the whole congregation. So you would distinguish between what a camp was and a congregation. Okay, an interesting point. Let's see, Gail, go ahead.
Well, according to Rabbi Sachs, a camp is made up of people or animals who band together for defensive purposes, and a congregation is people who come together with shared ideals of what they want to do for the future.
Here's the key. If anyone asked you, is Israel a camp or a congregation, what's the correct answer? Both. Both. And unless you understand that, you don't understand Jewish history. Now, let me say what Gail said. I'll try and condense what Gail just said. Okay. Rabbi Sachs, in a book he wrote, a very famous book, which we are going to study next semester, that will be my special book with you for the second class. It was called Kol Dodi Dofek, the voice of my beloved Knox. It talks about the Jewish people and their vocation in history. Rabbi Soloveitchik distinguishes between camp and congregation. Now, let me read to you just the following paragraph, then I'm going to ask Gail or any of you to comment on it. Rabbi Sachs, there are, said Rabbi Soloveitchik, two ways in which a people become a group, whether it's a community, a society, or a nation. There are only two ways in which a people is formed, okay? The first is when they face a common enemy. They band together for mutual protection, knowing that only by doing so can they survive. Such a group is called a machane, a camp, okay? A defensive formation. And Gail is correct, that's not applied to human beings alone. All herd animals have this ability. Have you ever noticed that certain animals, especially not the carnivores, the grazing animals, they always gather in a herd? Why do they gather in a herd? Because there's strength in the group. No individual can survive the challenges that are going to face the group. The outlying dangers, the outlying threats that will face the Jewish people in history are such that as individuals, they will never be able to face the threat which meets them, okay? For the sake of mutual protection, knowing that they can only survive not as individuals, but by forming defensive groups, they will form camps. Animals do it and human beings do it too, okay? Why do we form groups? Because it is only as a social, cohesive group that we can meet the dangers that face us. We cannot meet them otherwise. And therefore, like all groups, Israel as a social group comes together and forms camps because there is safety in number. The way in which we meet the external threat is through forming camps, okay? That's the camp. What is the difference between the congregation? If a camp is formed to come together mutually and provide group defense against an outside threat that is greater than us, what is the difference between a camp and a congregation? Anybody want to tell me what a congregation is? A camp is a mutual defense force that is formed. Go ahead, Joseph.
I'd say the congregation comes together for higher order values, inspiration, keeping the culture alive and forward with descendants, so that those ideas not only survive but thrive. And so, to me, that's more permanent, and the camp could be more temporary.
Definitely, the camp is defensive in nature. It is to protect, to provide. I remember that pyramid we had a couple of weeks ago. To provide the physical and the security needs, we form camps. Camps enable us to share work, to share responsibilities, to form societies, to provide for our needs. Everybody does what they do, and the work of the camp guarantees the survival of the entire group. It gives us our blessings and provides us our security. But the higher level blessings are not meant by a camp. It is meant by a congregation. Now, does anyone know, when did Israel become a congregation? Go ahead, Jerry.
Was it when they had crossed over the Red Sea and they saw the mountain trembling and God said, "You got to follow my rules and be my people," and they said,
All right, what is that event called, Jerry? Very good. What is it called? When did they become a people, a nation? They became a congregation at Sinai. In Egypt, they were slaves. They had to be a people because they were all being persecuted as a people. The only way of surviving in Egypt was as a collective group, because no one person was strong enough to survive Egypt. That was the defensive need. According to, okay, let me read the second portion. There is a quite different form of association. People can come together because they share a common vision, a common goal, a set of ideals, an aspiration. This is the meaning of Ada, congregation. Okay, this isn't a camp anymore. This is a congregation. And Ada is not a defensive formation, but a creative one. People join together with others to do what none of them could achieve alone. If I want to change the world, I can't change it myself. What do I need? Other like-minded people who share my ideals and who want to create the kingdom that I want to create, all right? The Jewish people in Egypt were camps, but they went forth as machaneh, as defensive formations to protect themselves against external force. But when they came to Sinai, they were no longer a machaneh, a defensive formation only. They had now become a congregation. Now, let me explain this to you. Go ahead, Joseph.
As you speak, I get to thinking about something that Hal had helped me with. I didn't know the history of the state formation of Israel and of Zionism. So Hal assigned me a number of books and videos to watch so I could understand about the Zionist movement and the state of Israel. And the way you're talking about it, it was two purposes. After World War II and what happened in Europe, and
Very good.
the Jews needed safety in numbers, a safety of a state to fend off their people who are persecuting them in Europe, as well as Arab neighbors there. They needed to form a defense, a camp to defend and keep the people alive, but also keep alive for the state of Israel, so that the state of Israel can keep the culture of the Jews alive forever, the religion, the Jewish religion and ideals alive forever. So it was both a camp and a congregation.
Very good, Joseph. When Jews came to Israel in the pre-state period, they formed machanot, they formed camps. They had to defend themselves. They had to plant the land. They had to protect themselves against marauders. That was the first stage. That was the defensive formations that Jews formed in order to build up their presence in the land. But that was not going to build Israel. Joseph is correct. Israel had to be built up as an ideal, as a vision shared by many people together. And for that, you needed more than a camp. Let me read this, what it said. According to Rabbi Soloveitchik, there are two ways in which the Jewish people constitute a unique and distinctive nation. There are two ways we are Jews, okay? I'm now going to tell you are all Jews as a result of two different covenants. Okay, so listen carefully. Like a camp, the people of Israel can be brought together by what happens to them from the outside. Throughout history, one of the ways that we Jews are a people is because the way the outside world afflicts us and oppresses us and treats us. Even today, if you read what's happening in United States today and anti-Semitism, one of the ways that Jews have always been a people is because there are always people on the outside who hate us and who fight against us and who want to destroy us. Rabbi Soloveitchik refers to this kind of covenant. He calls this group identification based on threats from the outside. He calls that Brit Goral, a threat of fate. What makes us Jews? Because people are going to identify us as Jews, they're going to treat us as Jews, and whether we like it or not, whether we choose to accept our Jewishness or not, that's our lot. We are Jews. The world will treat us as Jews, and to protect ourselves in a world, we need a covenant of fate, which means that we need a covenant that tells us that as a people, even if besides what we do, we are bound to one another because the world is going to treat us as different than everybody else, okay? You may try, as Joseph says, to escape Jewishness. People may have thought they could escape and assimilate into the nations of the world around them. But guess what? Jewish history teaches us there's no such escape. Whether you like it or not, you are Jews. The great existential philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, in his book, Anti-Semite and Jew, said a Jew is a Jew because the anti-Semite identifies him as a Jew. It is not, according to Sartre, a chosen fate. The Jew is a Jew because the anti-Semite has decided that he will not be or cannot be anything else. We do not choose to be Jewish. Our fate is that we are Jews. We have been singled out and we will be treated as the world by Jews, whether we like it or not. This, says Rabbi Soloveitchik, is the Brit Goral, covenant of fate. Whether we like it or not, once we have been so identified, that is the way we will be treated by the world around us, okay? There are people who've never seen a Jew who are convinced that Jews control the world and that all the terrible things that happen in the world are Jewish plots and there's a cabal of people that are arranging everything. As far as they're concerned, the evil in the world is all identified with the Jewish people. Where does the evil come from in the world? The Jew, okay? Jews have no control over that. We didn't choose to be slaves in Egypt. We didn't choose to be slaves and to be oppressed. That fate was visited upon us by the Egyptians. That was our destiny. We lived in Egypt. We were singled out as being slaves. That is our covenant of fate. But what does the covenant of fate lead to? It leads to a shared sense of suffering. What does fate give us as Jews? A common sense that we have a common fate. We just saw the Steven Spielberg movie, The Fabelmans. And Spielberg, as personified by the young man in the film called Fabelman, learns that whether he wants to be a Jew or not, he's not going to escape his fate because the covenant of fate that has identified him as a Jew means he will never be able to escape it. Whether he gives it meaning or not, whether he finds it personally meaningful or not, the world will always treat him as a Jew because that is what the covenant of fate means. There are Jews and the world will always treat them as such, and their common suffering will bind them together and make them a people and strengthen them. That's what Egypt was about. We will be strengthened by common suffering to take on the higher task. But what is the higher task? This is what Soloveitchik says. But there is a second element of Jewish identity. Soloveitchik refers to this covenant as a Brit Ye'ud. He calls it a covenant of destiny. There's a covenant of fate, and there is a covenant of destiny. And Jews, by the way, are bound by both covenants. You are a Jew, even if you don't identify as a Jew, even if you have come to Judaism voluntarily and were something else originally, the fact of the matter is that whether you identify positively or not with your Judaism, whether you accept God's covenant, his commandments, whether you are religious, whether you accept your responsibilities or not, you share the covenant of fate. You are a Jew. The world has defined you as a Jew, and your fate is to live in the world as a Jew. But the second element is a covenant of destiny, which the Jewish people first experienced, not in Egypt, at Mount Sinai. Sinai was a moment when we took on the second identity, okay? Okay, this second covenant, the covenant of destiny, defines the Jews not as an object of persecution, but rather as a subject, not an object, a subject of unique vocation. What are we? To become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, and to serve God and to bring the truth of God's word into the world. This is the second covenant. This is called the covenant of destiny. So we Jews have two kinds of covenants. There is the covenant of fate that fates us to be Jews, that marks us off as Jews, that tells us that whether we identify as Jews or not, even if we convert and we try and blend in with society, the world is never going to let us forget that we are Jews. You can be fourth generation, fifth generation, you can have no Jewish background at all, no Jewish faith. In the eyes of the outside world, as in the eyes of Hitler, Jews and their descendants are always Jews. Nothing will change that. Okay? But you can choose to take the covenant and you can choose to accept that destiny and you can choose to make it your own, to make it not a covenant of fate, but a covenant of faith, of destiny. Okay? Under this new covenant, the Jewish people was defined not by what others did to it, but by the task, the job, the mission that they had undertaken, the role they had chosen to play in history. We are Jews not because the world regards us as Jews and treats us as Jews, but because this was our decision to accept this role and to play the part we were meant to play in spreading God's word to the world. The Israelites had not chosen to become slaves in Egypt. That fate had been thrust upon them by someone else, their enemies. They had, however, chosen to become God's people at Sinai when they said, we will do and we will obey. Okay? Na'aseh v'nishma. Our fate became our mission. What our covenant of fate, the covenant of being the descendants of Abraham, symbolized by circumcision, cut into our flesh, now becomes a covenant we choose. We choose to be Jews, to fulfill our destiny, to be a nation of priests and a holy people. This is what they meant by Na'aseh v'nishma. The last part, and this will be in the notes. This duality was first given expression in the Torah. When God said in the beginning of chapter 10, make 2 silver trumpets for yourself to gather together, to summon the congregation, the Edah, and to cause the camps to journey, God said, let these 2 trumpets symbolize the double covenant that I make with my people Israel. Sometimes the clarion blare of the trumpet calls to our sense of destiny, but sometimes it speaks to our sense of fate. So whether you are a Jew because you were born a Jew and for whatever reason God has thrust you into this unenviable position of being despised and small and minute and persecuted among the nations of the world, don't throw that away. Don't treat that with disdain. Cherish it, because that destiny of fate is also the destiny you have chosen. It is the destiny to join with God and to be servants of God and to bring God's message into the world. To be a Jew is both a covenant of fate and a covenant of destiny. That's the image of the 2 silver trumpets. Okay, so I hope you liked it. You can read this later. You can go back and read Sachs again. But I think it's a very small, clear, a little bit point made in 2 verses. You didn't even stress it. Why 2? Because the nature of Judaism is twofold. For those who are not religious, they will be reminded of the fact that they are Jews because they are associated as Jews. Their mission is to associate with the Jewish people, as Joseph says, to identify with the nation of Israel because we are a people, but a people with a purpose, a mission, to testify to God, to live a life that bears witness to our role in the world. That is our covenant with destiny. And we have both. Okay, Erwin, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. I would have guessed that we became the congregation started when we built the tabernacle. That would have been my statement.
The tabernacle we built jointly together as a joint enterprise, and that unified us as a people. You are right, Erwin. But before we were ever told to build the tabernacle, we first had to accept God. We accepted God at Sinai before God commanded us to build the tabernacle. It wasn't the tabernacle, Erwin, the place that turned us into the people. That was just a project that we undertook so that God would always dwell in our midst. The real origin of the Jewish people is when we all stood under, all 2.5 million of us stood under Sinai. We all heard God speaking. God gave us his commands. He said, I brought you out of Egypt. I have made you a special people. You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy people. Now I ask you, Israel, will you accept your destiny? And the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hearken. Okay. So actually it was the giving of the Torah at Sinai prior to the building of the tabernacle, which was the moment at which Israel became a nation. Okay. A common purpose. We became a covenant community to God for a common purpose. Okay.
Okay, well, one of the reasons I was thinking along those lines is because at Mount Sinai, the people were encamped. They had
Correct.
animals with them. They had everything with them.
That is true.
So to me, that made it a camp.
It was a camp. I'm not saying it wasn't. Israel was a camp before it was a nation. Camp just meant we were a people. We had to be protected. God protected us in the wilderness, Erwin. He was the cloud of fire and the cloud of smoke. He fed us. He cared for us. We were a camp protected by God. But then God said, after he provided us with this camp, he said to us, all right, now I brought you out. I'm going to make you my people. If you want to be my people, if after all the good things I've done for you, after caring for you and sustaining you and protecting you and feeding you, if you are prepared to now accept it, I want you to take on another responsibility. I want you to go out as my messengers into the world. I want you to be my priests and bring all the nations of the world to the knowledge of the true God. Will you do it, Israel? As you're encamped around the mountain, even though you are already a camp, you started as a camp in Egypt, will you now take on the destiny of being not just a camp, but will you be my people? Will you fulfill the destiny I have shown you, the destiny to be a unique people? And Israel said to Erwin, we'll do it. They didn't question it at all. They didn't last a constant long. They faltered. But the moment that God gave them the chance and said, you have this one opportunity, having everything I've done for you, you can either reject it or accept it. But I'm asking you now, Israel, will you accept my covenant? There's a whole formal ceremony. The people formally covenant with God and say, God, we will be your holy people. We will be your nation of priests. We will be your holy nation. Everything you tell us to do, we don't even demand that you tell us. Whatever you say to us, whatever task you give us, we accept it. At that moment, Erwin, even before they had anything else, they became a people. The moment they decided to use their freedom to serve God. God first frees them from Egypt. He first provides for their physical needs. He makes them free. Then, Erwin, God says, now that you have your freedom, will you use your freedom to choose to live the life that I expect of you? Will you choose to serve me? The people say, we'll do it, God. We'll accept. That was the great moment. That was when Sinai, the peoplehood, as added to the camp. Okay, anybody else? Oh, you're welcome. All right, I've given you a lot to chew on. Tomorrow, I will send you out the last of the notes. We are a remarkable nation. I don't understand the mystery of Israel. I truly don't. The sensible part of me says Israel should have disappeared long ago amongst the other ancient peoples of the world. By all physical laws, this weak and vulnerable and small people should not have endured, especially when they were against enemies all around them and everybody hated them. We should not have made it. Like Hittites and like Amorites and Jebusites, we should be a historical footnote. But we are not a historical footnote. Everything that occurs, from what's going on in the Middle East, to what happens in Mar-a-Lago, to what happens around the world, we Jews are the stars. Whether we like it or not, God says you can't escape it. You're bound by the covenant of faith. You are my witnesses, whether you like it or not. You may not want to be my witnesses. Guess what? No choice. You are my witnesses. This is your lot in life. And don't think you're going to escape it by not identifying, because other people will identify you as Jews. But God says you can take that fate and you can turn it into a vocation. You can use the freedom that you have to voluntarily serve me and to bring my values into the world. And that, God says, will be your glory. That will be your honor in the eyes of the nations. They may hate you now, but in the end, they will come to recognize the valuable service you served to bring this truth to the world. That is the vocation of the Jewish people. Okay, so we're talking about something much, much bigger than a family, than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, much bigger than tribes, bigger even than the generation in the wilderness. We are talking about a historic people who God covenants with to fulfill a divine purpose in history. With that, thank you all. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the weeks we have been together. It's been a great 6 weeks. I'll send you out in another week or so the format for the next semester. And by the way, this view of Jewish history as a balance between fate and destiny, that will be the second class I teach next year. I'm going to call it, based on Soloveitchik's books, Kol Dodi Dofek, which comes from, by the way, the book of the Song of Songs. There's a verse in the Song of Songs that says, the voice of my beloved knocks. God is searching for Israel. And God turns to Israel, who has gone through all this faithful servant and has suffered all that it has suffered. And in the book of Songs, it says, Kol Dodi Dofek, the voice of my beloved knocks. Ask me, will you continue to serve me? Will you continue to be my people? Will you continue to fulfill the mission you accepted upon yourself? And I will show you that the answer of Jewish history is we've chosen to do exactly that, okay? It's not an imposition. It's not something forced upon us. It's a choice that we make. So with that, good night, everyone. You're free to visit if you would like amongst each other. And be well. I will talk to you again. I will see you again around December for Hanukkah, and we will have our next lecture, which will talk about Jewishness and power. Is it power